There are certain events that leave an indelible mark on the collective memory of a community. The flooding and devastation caused in the wake of Hurricanes Connie and Diane in 1955 is one of those events. Let's explore just what happened and hear the stories of some of the brave souls who made it through the storm.
Weather forecasting in 1955 was not as it is today. There were instruments, barometer, hygrometer, weather balloons that went up, snow and rain gauges, but there was no computer modeling or weather satellites or radar. So weathermen basically reported what the weather was currently. The National Weather Service would get information from airplane pilots or ship captains at sea if they encountered a storm. But as far as the storm's track and intensity and predicting where it would be 3 or 4 days from now, that was not heard of then. Hurricane Connie, which occurred on August 12th and 13th, dumped about 6 to 10 inches of rain in the area and saturated the ground. At the same time that Connie was leaving the area, another hurricane was forming. So now we have a saturated ground, and Hurricane Diane comes, and there was no warning that it was a significant storm that would impact this area. On the night of August 18th is when really the rain started. There was nowhere for the water to go into the ground, so it was all runoff, and it all ran into the Wallenpaupack Creek. The water rose very fast. Smaller rivers rose as much as 10 feet in a few hours. This area had never flooded to that much of an extent that people would even think of leaving their houses, but it did. A lot of the debris that was picked up in the water, such as tree trunks and rocks, all flowed toward 2 bridges that were in Greentown, and they blocked the structure of the bridges, and the water built up behind the bridges until it got to the point where the bridges didn't hold anymore and they washed away. And so there was this flood of water that came rushing into Greentown. Houses were ripped off their foundations. People had to go to their second floors to escape the water because not only the basement but the first floors were inundated with water. Cars were thrown around like toys and buildings thrown apart. It was just something that the area had never seen before.
The wake of the downpour brought numerous tales of tragedy as well as remarkable heroism.
The Smith family, there were 2 children and husband and wife. They recall being in the attic trying to survive the flood, and all of a sudden the house wasn't shaking anymore. There was something different about it, and they thought that the storm had subsided and the waters were receding, when in fact the house had been lifted off the foundation and was being carried down the river. The house broke apart. The mother, Pearl Smith, died. She didn't know how to swim. One of the children and her father survived the flood by clinging onto a tree, and the second child survived as well.
We were hit by a wall of water. We had no control of the car. We finally wound up hitting a tree, sideways about a mile downstream. The water was coming up inside the car, but we couldn't get the passenger side door open because it was jammed up against the tree. It took my brother and me both to push open the driver's side door for Bobby. We put Bobby up in the tree first because he couldn't swim, and then Ronnie went up and I went up last. During the flood up in the tree, we did a lot of praying. We said so many prayers that God was with us. He was that night, that's all I can tell you.
The Morrico's house, a grandmother and 4 of her grandchildren under the age of 6 lived there. The parents were on their way home when the flood hit. Someone had gotten a rowboat to go out to the house where the Morricos lived to rescue the grandmother and grandchildren, and she pushed the boat away. She felt safer in the house, as many people did, than attempting to board a boat and be rowed away in the raging river.
We got George Geeg's boat and rowed down to the Smith house to get as many of them out as we could. On my next trip, I went to the Morricos. They had 4 kids. But the minute the boat touched the side of the house, it shot right up in the air. The pressure was that hard. I grabbed a hold of the boat, and the PP&L guys pulled me back up to the hill. Then the PP&L guys said, "We're gone."
The Phillips family had John and Myrtle Phillips in the house. They were middle-aged, and Myrtle's aunt and John's mother were also in the house. There were people on the higher ground who were encouraging them to leave, but they didn't, and the house was swept away.
I awoke around midnight. I heard a group of people talking outside, and I could hear another sound. someone calling from a distance. They heard Mildred calling from across the water. She landed in a treetop and clung to the branches as the waters rose around her. It was still storming as I began swimming. The night was so black I couldn't see anything except in the flashes of lightning. We made it to the creek bed, the deepest part of the water, and then we both held the rope while the men pulled us the rest of the way to the shore. We had lost everything, but my family had survived.
The next morning, when people walked out of their house, it was a beautiful sunny day, and people on higher ground had no idea of the destruction that was down in the flat area along the Wallenpaupack.
The storm had left much of the northeast in ruins, tearing apart our lake region area.
What's remarkable about it, though, is how the community came together to help those victims of the flood. The problem in this area was that the water was contaminated, and so there was a real need for sanitation and disease control. The pharmacist, Willis Gilpin, was the civil defense coordinator. The two local doctors in Newfoundland, one was in charge of sanitation, the other was in charge of health. The school nurse and one doctor administered typhoid shots to everyone in the area. Residents were asked who were not affected by the flood to contribute food and clothing to help out. The Red Cross came in to help.
In the midst of destruction came reorganization. Flood mitigation plans were made and dams were built. Ultimately, it was through hard work and cooperation that our area slowly rebuilt. For more information on the 1955 flood and other events of local interest, be sure to visit the Green Drare Historical Society.
And if you like Wally Life, please click the subscribe button below.